The diner windows exploded inward in a shower of glass. Adrian Blackstone stood in the doorway like a predator who had cornered his prey, flanked by men in expensive suits whose eyes promised violence. "Hello, darling," he said, his voice dripping with false sweetness. "I think it's time to come home." Amara Baptiste looked up from the table where she sat with investigative journalist Marcus Rivera, her hands trembling as she clutched the evidence that could destroy her husband's pharmaceutical empire. "I'm not going anywhere with you, Adrian." He laughed, a sound sharp as breaking glass. "Oh, but you are. You see, I have hours of footage of you talking to yourself in that basement, acting like a complete lunatic. Any court in the country would find you mentally unstable." Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between them. "She's not going anywhere." "And who are you?" Adrian's eyes narrowed with deadly calculation. "The crusading journalist who thinks he can bring down empires with pretty words." But Amara stood up, something shifting inside her as she met her husband's gaze with a strength that seemed to surprise him. "You're right about one thing, Adrian. I have been experiencing some significant challenges lately. Like discovering that my husband isn't just an abuser, he's a mass murderer who's been profiting from children's deaths while sleeping beside me every night." She pulled out her phone, finger hovering over the play button. "What are you doing?" Adrian's confident mask slipped. "Playing a recording from last month. You remember, don't you? When you were bragging about your business strategy?" She pressed play. Adrian's own voice filled the destroyed diner, crystal clear and damning. "Let them die slowly. Desperate families pay more when hope is measured in months instead of years. Dead children don't generate revenue, but dying ones. That's where the real money is." At 3 a.m. on a Tuesday morning, Dr. Amara Baptiste had walked out of a $15 million Beverly Hills mansion with nothing but the clothes on her back. But what she carried in her mind would bring down a pharmaceutical empire and save thousands of children's lives. This is the story of a woman who discovered that sometimes the person trying to destroy you is actually forging you into someone strong enough to save the world. Have you ever felt trapped in a situation where leaving seemed impossible? What would you do if you discovered the person you loved most was hiding a secret that could destroy thousands of lives? Stay with me because what Amara discovered in her husband's secret files will shock you, and how she used it to rebuild her life will inspire you to never give up on yourself. If stories of resilience and redemption inspire you, hit that like button now and subscribe for more incredible true stories that will change how you see the world. But to understand how Amara found the courage to record those damning words, we need to go back to the beginning. Back to the morning mist that clung to the windows of their Beverly Hills mansion like tears refusing to fall. The house at 1247 Mulholland Drive was a monument to success, its pristine white facade gleaming against the California hills like a temple dedicated to wealth and power. 43 rooms spread across 18,000 square feet of marble, mahogany, and crystal. Gardens that cost more to maintain each month than most people earned in a year. An infinity pool that seemed to spill into the Los Angeles skyline below. But beauty, Amara had learned, could be its own kind of prison. Inside this architectural masterpiece, she moved through her morning routine with the precision of a dancer performing a death waltz. Every step choreographed to avoid the landmines of her husband's rage. Every gesture calculated to maintain the illusion of domestic bliss that the outside world expected to see. The marble floors that had once symbolized luxury now felt cold beneath her bare feet. Each surface reflected a woman who had mastered the art of making herself invisible in her own home. The house had 43 rooms, but somehow there was nowhere to hide. Steam rose from the French press as she prepared his coffee. Colombian beans that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget, imported directly from a plantation Adrian owned in the mountains outside Bogota. The irony wasn't lost on her. Even his coffee came from something he controlled completely. Her reflection in the chrome appliance showed a woman who had become an expert in concealment. Foundation carefully applied to hide the finger-shaped bruises on her throat. A silk scarf draped artfully to cover the marks on her collarbone where he had bitten her hard enough to draw blood 2 nights ago. Long sleeves hiding the rope burns on her wrists from the games he liked to play when he was feeling particularly creative with his cruelty. The morning light streaming through the floor-to-ceiling window should have been beautiful. Instead, it felt like a spotlight illuminating her shame. How do you explain to the world that you have a PhD in biochemistry from Stanford, that you once published groundbreaking research on pediatric leukemia treatments, that you were brilliant and accomplished and strong, and yet you can't figure out how to leave the man who treats you like his personal property? Picture this. You wake up every morning calculating how to survive the day without triggering the rage of the person who promised to love you forever. You study his moods like a meteorologist tracking dangerous storms, watching for the subtle signs that could mean the difference between a peaceful evening and a night spent cleaning blood off expensive furniture. What does it feel like to be successful, educated, intelligent, and completely powerless in your own home? The sound of his footsteps on the marble staircase made her spine stiffen instinctively. Each footfall echoed through the cavernous foyer like a countdown to judgment. Adrian Blackstone descended from the master suite like a storm front approaching, all tailored perfection and barely contained violence. That he was undeniably handsome, the kind of man who commanded attention when he walked into a room. 6 feet 2 inches of lean muscle wrapped in custom suits that cost more than cars. Silver threading through dark hair that spoke of distinguished maturity rather than age. Eyes the color of winter storms that could charm investors and senators with equal ease. His pharmaceutical empire, Blackstone Industries, had made him one of the most powerful men in California. 47 facilities across 12 countries. Annual revenues exceeding $8 billion. A company that controlled life-saving medications for conditions ranging from childhood cancer to heart disease to HIV. The kind of man who appeared on the covers of business magazines with headlines about visionary leadership and innovative research, but in the privacy of their home, power meant something far more sinister. The Singapore deal fell through, he announced, not looking up from his phone as he settled into his chair at the breakfast table. The words carried the weight of an approaching hurricane, and Amara felt the familiar knot of fear tightening in her stomach. The breakfast table was a slab of black marble imported from Italy, surrounded by chairs that cost $15,000 each. Fresh orchids flown in from Thailand twice weekly created an elegant centerpiece. Everything perfect, everything controlled, everything designed to project an image of sophisticated success. Amara's hands trembled slightly as she placed his coffee before him. The cup clicking against the saucer seemed to echo through the vast kitchen like a warning bell. She recognized that particular edge in his voice, the one that preceded nights when she would find herself pressed against walls, gasping for air that he controlled with his hands around her throat. "I'm sorry to hear that," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Sorry." His laugh was sharp as broken glass. "You're sorry? Do you have any idea what this means? 18 months of work, gone because some bleeding heart board members suddenly developed consciences about drug pricing." She remained silent, knowing that anything she said would only fuel the fire burning behind his eyes. Adrian's pharmaceutical company had built its fortune on life-saving medications priced beyond the reach of those who needed them most. The irony wasn't lost on her. A man who held healing in his hands but dealt only in pain. Insulin that costs $12 to manufacture, sold for $400. Cancer treatments that could be produced for pennies, priced at thousands per dose. "These people don't understand business," he continued, his voice rising with each word. "They think we're running a charity." Amara poured herself orange juice with hands that shook despite her best efforts to remain calm. She had heard these rants before. Adrian genuinely believed that healthcare was a commodity like any other, that sick people should pay whatever the market would bear for the privilege of staying alive. "The board wants to lower prices on the pediatric leukemia treatment," he said, his tone suggesting this was somehow a personal insult. "Apparently, there's been some media attention about families going bankrupt trying to afford treatment for their children." Her blood turned to ice. The pediatric leukemia treatment he was referring to so casually was based on her own research. Work she had done 3 years ago, before he had convinced her to abandon her career and focus on being the perfect wife. Research that had consumed her for months, driven by memories of her younger brother David, who had died at age 7 from a particularly aggressive form of childhood leukemia. How much does the treatment cost?" she asked quietly, his fingers wrapped around her wrist with deceptive gentleness, but she felt the steel beneath the silk. $47,000 per treatment cycle. Most children need at least 6 cycles. Do the math, beautiful. The endearment sounded obscene in his mouth. A word that should have been a caress but instead felt like a blade drawn across her soul. She nodded, throat tight with unshed tears and unspoken screams, nearly $300,000 to save a child's life. Money that most families would never have, could never earn, could never borrow. She thought of her brother David, of the way he had smiled even when the pain was unbearable, of how he had told her he wanted to be a doctor someday so he could help other kids who were sick like him. You know what I need from you today, don't you, beautiful? Adrian's voice had taken on the tone she had learned to fear most. Soft, almost gentle, but with an undertone that promised consequences for the wrong answer. Yes, she whispered. Good girl. The investors are coming for dinner tonight. I need you to be perfect. You know what that means. She knew. It meant the blue dress that showed just enough cleavage to be interesting but not enough to be inappropriate. It meant smile, laugh at their jokes, compliment their wives, play the role of the accomplished woman who had chosen to step back from her career to support her successful husband. It meant pretending that the bruises hidden beneath silk and makeup didn't exist, but what Adrian didn't know was that his perfect wife had been living a double life. For 2 years, Amara had been documenting every bruise, every threat, every moment of violence. Hidden cameras throughout their home captured conversations he thought were private. Audio recordings stored in encrypted cloud accounts preserved his casual admissions of price manipulation and market abuse. But more than that, she had been using her background in biochemistry to uncover the truth about his company's most guarded secrets. The basement of their mansion had been converted into a state-of-the-art laboratory when they first married. Adrian had presented it as a wedding gift, a place where she could continue her research while also fulfilling her duties as his wife. It was equipped with everything a biochemist could dream of. Spectrometers, chromatography equipment, compound analyzers, everything necessary to conduct pharmaceutical research at the highest level, but as their marriage deteriorated, as Adrian's true nature revealed itself, the laboratory had become something else entirely. It became her sanctuary, her secret headquarters, the place where she was still Dr. Amara Baptiste instead of just Mrs. Adrian Blackstone. In the hours when he believed she was shopping or getting her nails done or having lunch with the other pharmaceutical wives, she had been analyzing compounds, testing formulations, and discovering the horrifying truth about Blackstone Industries' business practices. What do you do when the person who's supposed to protect you is the one you need protection from? When home becomes a battlefield where love and fear dance together in the shadows. That morning, as Adrian left for his emergency board meeting, his phone already pressed to his ear as he barked orders at subordinates, Amara descended into the basement with a purpose that burned brighter than her fear. The laboratory was a testament to dreams deferred. State-of-the-art equipment that had once been meant for research that could save lives now served a different purpose entirely. But today, that equipment would help her save lives in a way Adrian could never have imagined. She pulled up the files she had been compiling for months. Chemical analyses that revealed the horrifying truth about Adrian's latest blockbuster medication. The drug marketed as Leukamina, a breakthrough treatment for rare childhood cancers, was nothing more than a repackaged, diluted version of an existing generic medication called methotrexate. Methotrexate cost approximately $12 to produce in the quantities Blackstone was manufacturing. After dilution and repackaging, they were selling it as Leukamina for $47,000 per treatment cycle. A markup of over 300,000% on a medication that had been available as a generic drug for over 30 years, but Amara's investigation had gone deeper than simple price manipulation. She had been corresponding with Dr. Marcus Rivera, an investigative journalist who specialized in pharmaceutical fraud. What had started as professional consultation had evolved into something that made her heart race for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. Marcus Rivera was everything Adrian was not. Where her husband commanded through intimidation, Marcus inspired through intelligence. Where Adrian saw only profit margins, Marcus saw human suffering that demanded justice. Where Adrian spoke to her like she was an expensive possession, Marcus engaged with her mind, her expertise, her passion for science that could serve humanity. Their encrypted messages had become the highlight of her days. Conversations that reminded her of who she used to be before Adrian convinced her that she was nothing without him. Marcus wrote to her mind, not just her pain, discussing complex biochemical processes and ethical frameworks with the kind of intellectual intimacy she had forgotten existed. His latest message waited in her secure folder. Dr. Baptiste, your analysis of the leukemia compound is brilliant, but I'm more concerned about the woman behind the research. The pattern of price manipulation you've uncovered suggests systematic fraud at the highest levels of Blackstone Industries. But are you safe? Your communications suggest you're in a dangerous situation, and I need you to know that there are resources available if you need help. The question pierced through her carefully constructed walls. When was the last time someone had asked about her safety without wanting to exploit her vulnerability? When had anyone looked beyond the perfect facade to see the woman suffocating beneath it? Have you ever found connection in the darkest moment of your life? When someone reached through your pain and saw your strength instead of your brokenness, she typed her response carefully, knowing that each word could be evidence someday. Dr. Rivera, the situation is more complex than simple fraud. I've discovered that Blackstone Industries has been systematically suppressing research that could lead to actual cures, not just treatments. My own research from 3 years ago developed a compound that could cure pediatric leukemia in 87% of cases. Adrian buried it because cured children don't generate recurring revenue. I have the documentation to prove it. She attached the files that would change everything. Years of research data, clinical trial results, FDA correspondence that had never been submitted, email chains between Adrian and other pharmaceutical executives discussing the deliberate suppression of curative treatments in favor of ongoing therapeutic regimens. The implications were staggering. It wasn't just about overpriced medications. Adrian and companies like his were actively preventing cures from reaching the market because healthy children didn't need expensive monthly treatments. As she uploaded the files, her phone buzzed with a text from Adrian. Board meeting running late. Don't wait up. And Amara? I've been thinking about our conversation this morning. We should discuss your future research projects when I get home. The word sent a chill down her spine. Adrian's discussions about her activities usually involved detailed explanations of why she was too stupid, too emotional, too unstable to make decisions for herself. They typically ended with physical reminders of exactly who was in charge of their household, but this time felt different. More threatening. More final. She typed a quick response to Marcus. I think he suspects something. Can you meet tonight? I have more evidence, but I may be running out of time. His reply came within minutes. There's a 24-hour diner on Sunset Boulevard in East LA, Mel's Diner. I'll be there at midnight. Amara, if you're in immediate danger, go to the police. She almost laughed at that suggestion. Go to the police with what? Bruises she couldn't prove came from her husband. Recordings that might be inadmissible in court. Accusations against one of the most powerful men in California, a man who donated millions to political campaigns and sat on the boards of universities and hospitals. No. She had to be smarter than that. She had to have irrefutable evidence, documented proof that would be impossible to dismiss or explain away. She had to build a case so strong that not even Adrian's money and connections could save him. That evening, the investors arrived as scheduled. 12 couples representing pharmaceutical distribution networks across Asia and Europe. Men in suits that cost more than most people's cars, women dripping in jewelry that could fund small nations. They sat around the dining table that seated 24, discussing market penetration strategies and regulatory capture methods over courses prepared by a chef who had trained in Paris and charged $3,000 per person for the experience. Amara played her role perfectly. The gracious hostess, the supportive wife, the woman who had willingly stepped back from her own successful career to help her husband build his empire. She smiled, she laughed, she made small talk about fashion and charity galas while inside she catalogued every admission of criminal activity, every casual reference to price manipulation, every joke about desperate families bankrupting themselves for their children's lives. The beauty of the American healthcare system, one investor observed over the dessert course, is that demand is completely inelastic. People will pay anything to save their children's lives. Absolutely, agreed another. And with proper patent management, we can maintain exclusivity for decades. Generic competitors can be tied up in litigation until the market opportunity has passed. Adrian raised his wine glass, a vintage Bordeaux that cost more per bottle than most families spent on groceries in a month. Gentlemen, ladies, you understand the fundamental principle that drives our success. We're not selling medications. We're selling hope. And hope is the most valuable commodity in the world. The table erupted in appreciative laughter. Amara smiled and applauded along with everyone else, but beneath the dining table, her hands were trembling with rage. Can you imagine discovering that your life's work to save children was being used to profit from their deaths? Drop a comment below about what you think Amara should do next, and don't forget to share this story with someone who needs to hear about courage in the face of impossible odds. As the evening wound down and the investors departed in their chauffeured cars, Adrian's mood shifted. The charm and sophistication he had displayed for their guests evaporated, replaced by the cold calculation that Amara recognized as far more dangerous than his explosive anger. You were perfect tonight, he said, but something in his tone made the compliment sound like a threat. Absolutely perfect. Almost too perfect. They stood in the foyer, surrounded by marble and crystal and art that cost more than most people's homes. The silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken menace. I'm not sure what you mean, Amara said carefully. Don't you? Adrian moved closer, and she caught the scent of expensive cologne mixed with something else. Something that smelled like fear and violence. I've been having interesting conversations with my security team lately. About network traffic from our home internet connection. About encrypted communications and unusual data transfers. Her blood turned to ice, but she forced her expression to remain neutral. I don't understand what you're talking about. Of course you don't. His hand came to rest on her shoulder, thumb pressing into the tender spot where he had left bruises the week before. But I think it's time we had a little chat about exactly how you've been spending your time in that basement laboratory. The basement. Her sanctuary. Her secret headquarters. The place where she had built the case that could bring down his empire. I've been doing yoga, she lied smoothly. The mirror walls make it perfect for stretching routines. His grip tightened until she had to bite her lip to keep from crying out. Yoga. How wonderfully domestic of you. His voice dropped to the whisper that she had learned to fear most. But I think we both know that's not true, don't we, beautiful? He leaned closer, his breath hot against her ear. I know about the cameras, Amara. I know about the recordings. I know about your little correspondence with journalists. Did you really think I was that stupid? Terror and disbelief warred in her chest. How long had he known? How much had he seen? How many steps ahead of her had he been while she thought she was building the case that would destroy him? I don't know what you're talking about, she repeated, but her voice cracked on the words. Adrian stepped back, studying her face with the detached interest of a scientist examining a specimen. Tomorrow morning, I'm having the basement renovated. New flooring, new lighting, new everything. Any equipment that's down there will need to be removed. Permanently. The message was clear. Her laboratory, her evidence, her sanctuary, everything would be destroyed. Years of careful documentation reduced to rubble. And Amara? He was already walking toward the stairs, but he paused to deliver his final words. Pack a bag. We're going to take a little vacation. Somewhere quiet, where you can recover from the stress that's obviously been affecting your judgment lately. She stood frozen in the foyer long after she heard their bedroom door close. A vacation to somewhere quiet. Somewhere remote. Somewhere nobody would think to look for her if she disappeared, but Adrian had underestimated his wife. He had no idea that she had been uploading everything to secure cloud servers for months. He didn't know about the network of contacts she had built, the journalists and researchers and lawyers who were already building cases against Blackstone Industries. Most importantly, he had no idea that she had made arrangements for exactly this scenario. At 2:47 a.m., while Adrian slept the peaceful sleep of a man convinced of his own invincibility, Amara made her choice. She slipped out of bed with the practiced silence of someone who had learned that survival depended on invisibility. Her movements were economical, purposeful. No time for sentiment, no room for doubt. She dressed in dark clothes suitable for running, grabbed the emergency bag she had packed months ago, and made her way downstairs. The house that had been her prison for 3 years had never felt more like a tomb. 43 rooms of marble and crystal and imported wood, all of it meaningless now. All of it contaminated by the knowledge of what Adrian really was. At the front door, she paused for one last look at the life she was leaving behind. The perfect home, the perfect marriage, the perfect lie that had nearly killed her soul. Tomorrow, Adrian would wake up to find his perfect wife gone. He would discover that his basement laboratory had been emptied of everything except the hidden cameras that had recorded his own confessions. He would learn that his conversations with investors had been captured and transmitted to journalists around the world. But tonight, Dr. Amara Baptiste was walking out of her golden prison with nothing but the clothes on her back and evidence that would save thousands of children's lives. What does freedom feel like when you've forgotten what it means to breathe without permission? The morning mist was already beginning to lift from the hills as she walked down Mulholland Drive. Behind her, the mansion stood silent and imposing, a monument to power and wealth built on the suffering of innocence. Ahead of her lay uncertainty, danger, and the possibility of redemption. She thought of her brother David, of his smile even in the face of unbearable pain. She thought of the children currently lying in hospital beds, their families bankrupting themselves for treatments that should cost dollars instead of thousands. She thought of Marcus Rivera, waiting for her in a diner across the city, ready to help her transform her pain into justice. The phoenix doesn't just rise from ashes. She soars above them, carrying light to places that had forgotten what hope looked like, and this phoenix was ready to fly. The 24-hour diner on Sunset Boulevard existed in a different universe from Beverly Hills. Cracked vinyl booths, fluorescent lights that flickered intermittently, and the smell of bacon grease that had soaked into the walls over decades of serving coffee to insomniacs and shift workers. It was exactly the kind of place Adrian would never think to look for his perfect wife. Dr. Marcus Rivera sat in a corner booth, laptop open, surrounded by manila folders thick with documentation. When Amara walked through the door at exactly midnight, still wearing the dark clothes she had escaped in, he didn't see a victim fleeing domestic violence. He saw a warrior who had just won the most important battle of her life. Marcus was nothing like Adrian. Where her husband was all sharp edges and barely contained violence, Marcus radiated a quiet strength that didn't need to dominate to command respect. His dark eyes held intelligence and compassion in equal measure, and when he looked at her, she felt seen for the first time in years. Dr. Baptiste, he said, standing as she approached his booth. The use of her professional title, a name she hadn't heard in years, nearly brought her to her knees with its simple acknowledgement of who she used to be. "I wasn't sure you'd come," he admitted as she slid into the booth across from him. "I wasn't sure I'd survive if I didn't." The words hung between them, honest and raw in a way that made something shift in her chest. For so long, every conversation had been a negotiation, every word weighed for its potential to trigger Adrian's rage. But with Marcus, she could speak truth without calculating the cost. "What you've uncovered about Blackstone Industries," he said, sliding a tablet across the table, "it's going to change everything. But I need you to know that once we publish this, there's no going back. He'll come after you with everything he has." Amara looked at the screen, her own research compiled into a devastating expose that would topple her husband's empire. Children's faces stared back at her, young cancer patients whose families had bankrupted themselves buying Adrian's overpriced medications while he counted profits from their desperation. "There's something else," Marcus said quietly, his hand covering hers. The contact sent electricity through her system, not the violent jolt of fear she had grown accustomed to with Adrian, but something warm and healing that reminded her body what gentle touch could feel like. "Something I discovered while investigating your husband's company. The pharmaceutical fraud is just the surface level." He pulled out a thick folder, its contents promising to shatter what remained of her carefully constructed understanding of her marriage. Adrian isn't just overcharging for medications. He's been deliberately withholding cures. Your research from 3 years ago, the breakthrough treatment for pediatric leukemia that you thought was rejected by the FDA. It was never submitted. Adrian buried it because treating cancer is more profitable than curing it. The words hit her like physical blows. Her life's work, the research that had driven her to pursue biochemistry in the first place after watching her younger brother die of leukemia, had been completed years ago. The cure she had dedicated her career to developing had been sitting in Adrian's files while children continued to die. He's been using your research, Marcus continued gently, filing patents under his name, selling partial treatments while keeping the full cure locked away. You didn't just discover fraud, Amara. You discovered genocide. The revelation broke something inside her that had been barely holding together. She doubled over, grief and rage and guilt crashing over her in waves that threatened to drown her completely. All those families she had watched on the news, desperate parents selling everything they owned for treatments that could only delay the inevitable, while her husband sat on the cure that could save their children. Marcus was around the table in seconds, his arms encircling her as she sobbed against his chest. He held her through the storm of her grief, his presence an anchor in chaos that threatened to consume her completely. We can stop him, he whispered against her hair. We can save them. How many? She asked through her tears. How many children died while he sat on my research? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, and she knew the answer was worse than she had imagined. Based on the suppression timeline and cancer incidence rates, we estimate approximately 12,000 children over the past 3 years could have been saved with your treatment protocol. 12,000. 12,000 children who could have grown up, gone to school, fallen in love, had families of their own. 12,000 futures stolen not by disease, but by greed. Show me everything, she said, pulling back to meet his eyes. Every document, every communication, every piece of evidence. I want to understand the full scope of what he's done. For the next 2 hours, Marcus laid out a conspiracy that reached far beyond Blackstone Industries. A network of pharmaceutical companies that had been systematically suppressing curative research for decades, maintaining artificial scarcity to drive up profits on therapeutic treatments. Government officials who had been paid to expedite approvals for expensive therapies while blocking generic alternatives. Insurance companies that had been incentivized to cover long-term treatment regimens rather than one-time cures. Your research wasn't the only breakthrough that disappeared, Marcus explained, showing her a database of suppressed studies. Alzheimer's preventive protocols, diabetes reversal treatments, heart disease cures, even HIV elimination therapies. All buried because healthy people don't generate revenue. Amara stared at the screen, her scientific mind racing through the implications. This isn't just about money. This is about social control. Keeping populations sick and dependent creates political leverage. Exactly. And your husband is one of the key architects. The scope of Adrian's crimes was staggering. It wasn't just pharmaceutical fraud or domestic abuse. He was part of a system that was literally killing people for profit, maintaining suffering to preserve power structures that had turned human health into a commodity. Marcus, she said, something crystallizing in her mind. What if I told you I recorded everything? Every conversation about suppressing research, every discussion about price manipulation, every admission of deliberate harm to patients. His eyes widened. Everything. 2 years' worth of audio and video documentation. Hidden cameras throughout our house, recording devices in his office, encrypted backups of every file on his personal computers. I have him confessing to crimes that would put him away for life. Marcus leaned back in the booth, a slow smile spreading across his face. Amara, you didn't just build a case against pharmaceutical fraud. You built a case against organized murder. But even as they spoke, neither of them realized that Adrian was already one step ahead. He had traced her location through the GPS in her wedding ring, the one piece of jewelry she had forgotten to remove in her haste to escape. Outside the diner, black SUVs were taking position, and the man who had turned their marriage into a prison was preparing to drag her back to a cage that would make their previous life look like paradise. The first sign of trouble was the sudden silence outside. The usual traffic sounds of Sunset Boulevard seemed to fade, replaced by an ominous quiet that made the hair on Amara's arms stand up. "Something's wrong," she whispered, but before Marcus could respond, the diner's windows exploded inward in a shower of glass and violence. Adrian stood in the doorway like an avenging angel of darkness, flanked by men whose expensive suits couldn't hide the violence in their eyes. His face was a mask of cold fury, but something else burned beneath it, a possessive rage that she recognized with bone-deep terror. "Hello, darling," he said, his voice carrying the same false sweetness that had preceded countless nights of horror. "I think it's time to come home." Marcus stepped forward, placing himself between Amara and her husband with a courage that would have been noble if it weren't so dangerous. "She's not going anywhere with you." Adrian's laugh was sharp as breaking glass. "Dr. Rivera, isn't it? The crusading journalist who thinks he can bring down empires with pretty words and righteous indignation." His eyes flicked to Amara, still pressed against Marcus's back. "Did you tell him about our special arrangement, sweetheart? About how you signed away your rights to any research conducted during our marriage?" The words were a dagger twist of legal reality. In her naivety, she had signed prenuptial agreements that gave Adrian ownership of any intellectual property she developed while they were married. Her cure, her breakthrough that could save thousands of children, belonged to him completely. "It doesn't matter," Marcus said, though she could hear the uncertainty creeping into his voice. "The truth will come out." "Will it?" Adrian's smile was shark-like in its predatory pleasure. "Because I think you'll find that Dr. Baptiste has been experiencing some significant mental health challenges lately. The stress of our marriage ending, combined with her history of depression and anxiety, has led to some rather creative fantasies about pharmaceutical conspiracies." He pulled out his phone, and Amara's heart stopped as she recognized the video playing on the screen. Footage of her in the basement laboratory, talking to herself as she worked, gesticulating wildly as she put together pieces of evidence. Taken out of context, edited carefully, it looked like the ravings of someone experiencing a complete psychological break. "I have hours of footage," Adrian continued conversationally. "Documented evidence of my wife's deteriorating mental state. Any court in the country would find her testimony unreliable at best, delusional at worst. And as her loving husband, I'm naturally concerned about getting her the help she needs." Two of his men moved forward, reaching for Amara with hands that promised restraint and sedation and a quiet disappearance from everything she had ever known. But as they approached, something shifted inside her. The fear that had controlled her for so long transformed into something else, a cold, burning rage that felt nothing like the helpless terror she had lived with for years. "You're absolutely right about one thing," she said, stepping out from behind Marcus to meet her husband's eyes with a strength that seemed to surprise him. "I have been experiencing some significant challenges lately." Adrian's confident mask slipped slightly, uncertainty flickering behind his eyes. "Like discovering that my husband isn't just an abuser," she continued, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "He's a mass murderer who's been profiting from children's deaths while sleeping beside me every night." She pulled out her phone, finger hovering over the play button. "What are you doing?" Adrian demanded, the first crack appearing in his composed facade. "Playing a recording from last month. You remember, don't you? When you were bragging about your business strategy to those investors from Singapore?" The blood drained from Adrian's face as he realized the scope of his miscalculation. He had been so focused on controlling her body and her movements that he had never considered she might be recording his words, his confessions, his casual admission of crimes that would put him away for life. She pressed play, and Adrian's voice filled the diner, crystal clear and damning. "Let them die slowly. Desperate families pay more when hope is measured in months instead of years. Dead children don't generate revenue, but dying ones. That's where the real money is. We're not selling medications, gentlemen. We're selling hope. And hope is the most valuable commodity in the world." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Adrian's hired muscles seemed stunned by the casual brutality of his recorded words. But Amara wasn't finished. "That's just one recording," she said, holding up her phone like a weapon. "I have 2 years of conversations, Adrian. Every admission of fraud, every discussion about suppressing cures, every joke about desperate families bankrupting themselves for their children's lives. Including the conversation where you admitted to deliberately burying my leukemia research because cured children don't need monthly treatments." Adrian's composure cracked completely, revealing the desperate animal beneath the sophisticated exterior. "You can't use any of that. It was recorded without consent in our private home." "Actually," Marcus interjected, his voice carrying new confidence, "California is a two-party consent state for recording conversations. But there are exceptions for documenting criminal activity and domestic abuse. And thanks to the documentation Amara has provided, we now have probable cause for both." As if summoned by his words, the diner filled with the sound of sirens. Police cars, FBI vehicles, even news vans were converging on the location. Marcus pulled out his own phone, showing Adrian the screen. "I've been live streaming this entire conversation to my news network. Approximately 200,000 people just heard you confess to deliberately letting children die for profit." The trap had been perfect. Adrian thought he was hunting his escaped wife, but he had actually walked into an ambush orchestrated by people who understood his arrogance better than he understood it himself. This is the moment everything changes. Are you Team Amara? Let me know in the comments below, and if this story is keeping you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and ring the notification bell so you never miss stories like this. The investigation that followed made headlines around the world. FBI agents swarmed Blackstone Industries, seizing computers, files, and financial records that documented decades of systematic fraud. Congressional hearings were scheduled within days, with Amara scheduled as the star witness against an industry that had turned human suffering into profit margins. Adrian's empire crumbled with stunning speed. Stock prices collapsed, international distribution networks severed their contracts, and government agencies from 12 countries launched simultaneous investigations into Blackstone's business practices. The man who had controlled life-saving medications for millions of people found himself in federal custody, facing charges that carried sentences measured in lifetimes rather than years. But for Amara, the real victory wasn't Adrian's downfall. It was standing in front of a congressional committee, her quiet voice carrying the weight of thousands of families who had lost children to a man's greed, and announcing that her breakthrough leukemia treatment would be released immediately to the global medical community at no cost. "The research that could have saved my brother David 7 years ago," she testified, "the cure that my husband buried to protect his profit margins, will now be available to every child who needs it, regardless of their family's ability to pay." The gallery erupted in applause, but Amara's attention was focused on the front row, where Marcus sat with tears streaming down his face. He had stood beside her through every testimony, every interview, every moment when the weight of Adrian's crimes threatened to crush her spirit. He had seen her at her most vulnerable and chose to love her not despite her scars, but because of the strength that had created them. 6 months after Adrian's arrest, Amara found herself in a new laboratory. Not the basement prison where she had conducted her secret investigation, but a bright, open space funded by the foundation she had built with the proceeds from her patents. The Amara Baptiste Foundation for Pediatric Cancer Research occupied an entire floor of a medical building in downtown Los Angeles, with views that stretched to the ocean and equipment that surpassed anything she had dreamed of having. "You know what the most beautiful part of this is?" Marcus said one evening as they sat in her new office, surrounded by research data that would save countless lives. "What?" she asked, looking up from the grant applications that would fund the next generation of curative research. "Adrian thought he was destroying you. But every moment of cruelty, every attempt to break your spirit, actually forged you into someone strong enough to save the world." When he kissed her, it wasn't with the desperate hunger of someone trying to possess her, but with the reverence of someone who recognized her worth. His hands cradled her face like she was precious beyond measure, and for the first time in years, Amara felt truly safe. What does love look like when it's built on respect instead of control? When someone loves your mind as much as your heart, your strength as much as your vulnerability. Their relationship had grown slowly, carefully, like a plant recovering from drought. Marcus understood that healing takes time, that trust must be rebuilt brick by brick after it has been systematically demolished. He courted her intellect first, then her friendship, then her heart, never pushing, never demanding, always offering her the choice to set the pace of their intimacy. "I have something to ask you," he said one evening as they walked through the children's ward of the hospital where her treatment had saved its first 100 patients. Amara looked around at the artwork covering the walls, crayon masterpieces created by young patients whose lives had been extended far beyond what anyone had thought possible 6 months ago. Children who were going home to their families instead of dying in sterile hospital rooms. "What is it?" Marcus dropped to one knee right there in the hallway, pulling out a ring that was nothing like the ostentatious diamond Adrian had used to mark his territory. This was a simple band of platinum set with her birthstone, elegant in its simplicity, chosen to complement rather than overshadow. "Dr. Amara Baptiste," he said, his voice carrying the same respect he had always shown her name. "Would you marry me? Not to complete you, because you're already complete. Not to save you, because you saved yourself. But to stand beside you as we build a world where love heals instead of harms." She said yes through tears that tasted like freedom. Their wedding was held in the garden of the Children's Hospital, surrounded by young patients who had become the unexpected beneficiaries of Amara's courage. Instead of expensive flowers flown in from around the world, the decorations were drawings created by the children whose lives her research had saved. Crayon masterpieces that celebrated life and hope and second chances. As Amara walked down the aisle, she carried more than a bouquet. She carried the knowledge that sometimes the worst betrayals lead to the most beautiful redemptions, that love can bloom in the ashes of burned bridges, and that the strongest people are not those who never fall, but those who choose to rise again and again until they finally learn to fly. The ceremony was officiated by Dr. Sarah Chen, the pediatric oncologist who had administered the first doses of Amara's treatment protocol. The vows they exchanged were witnessed by families whose children were alive because one woman found the courage to walk away from a golden cage. "I promise," Marcus said, holding her hands as if they were made of something infinitely precious, "to love your brilliance, your passion, your fierce determination to heal the world. I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you, but as your equal partner in whatever battles we choose to fight together." "I promise," Amara replied, her voice strong with the confidence of someone who had reclaimed her own power, "to trust the love that builds instead of the love that breaks. To remember that my worth isn't measured by someone else's approval, and to keep choosing hope even when fear feels safer." Adrian's empire had crumbled, his fortune seized to pay restitution to the families he had destroyed. He would spend the rest of his life in federal prison, forgotten by a world that had moved on to celebrate the woman he had tried to break. The man who had controlled every breath she took for 3 years had become a footnote in her story, while she had become the author of her own liberation, but Amara's story wasn't about him anymore. It was about the laboratory where she created miracles, the man who loved her brilliance, the children whose lives proved that sometimes the best revenge is living beautifully, boldly, and completely free. As their first dance began under string lights that had been donated by families who couldn't afford to repay the woman who had saved their children, Amara realized something profound. The phoenix doesn't just rise from ashes. She soars above them, carrying light to places that had forgotten what hope looked like. And in her flight, she shows others that no matter how deep the darkness, dawn is always possible for those brave enough to seek it. The lessons from Amara's story reach far beyond her individual triumph. Her journey teaches us 5 fundamental truths about resilience, justice, and the power of refusing to be broken. First, strength is forged in struggle. Every moment of Adrian's abuse that should have destroyed Amara actually made her stronger, more determined, more capable of surviving what was to come. The difficulties we face aren't punishments, they're preparation for battles we don't yet know we'll have to fight. Second, your expertise is your superpower. Amara's background in biochemistry gave her the tools to understand Adrian's crimes and build the evidence necessary to stop them. The education you have, the skills you've developed, the knowledge you've acquired, these aren't just career assets. They're weapons you can use to fight injustice wherever you find it. Third, love should elevate, not diminish. The difference between Adrian's possession and Marcus's partnership shows us what healthy relationships actually look like. Real love makes you more yourself, not less. It builds your confidence instead of tearing it down. It celebrates your achievements instead of competing with them. Fourth, justice delayed is not justice denied. Amara spent 2 years building her case, documenting evidence, preparing for the moment when she would have enough proof to bring down Adrian's empire. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the immediate thing to do. Sometimes patience and preparation serve justice better than righteous anger. Fifth, healing happens through helping others. Amara could have taken her evidence, secured Adrian's conviction, and disappeared into a quiet life of personal recovery. Instead, she chose to build something bigger than her own healing. The foundation that bears her name, the research that continues to save lives, the example she sets for other survivors, all of this transformed her pain into purpose. These lessons apply to anyone facing impossible situations. Maybe you're trapped in an abusive relationship like Amara was. Maybe you've discovered corruption in your workplace, illegal activity in your community, or systematic injustice in your world. Maybe you feel powerless against forces that seem too big, too connected, too protected to challenge. Amara's story proves that individual courage can create collective change. One woman with evidence and determination brought down an empire built on suffering. One scientist with a conscience saved thousands of children's lives. One survivor who refused to stay silent inspired others to find their voices. But more than anything, Amara's story teaches us about the transformative power of refusing to accept the roles that others try to force us into. Adrian saw her as property to be controlled. Marcus saw her as a partner to be respected. The difference between those perspectives created the space for her to discover who she really was when nobody was trying to diminish her. You are not the limitations that others place on you. You are not the fear that tries to silence you. You are not the circumstances that seem to trap you. You are the choices you make when everything seems impossible. You are the courage you find when there's no safe option. You are the hope you choose when despair would be easier. Amara Baptiste walked out of a $15 million mansion with nothing and built an empire of healing that will outlast any pharmaceutical company. She transformed from a victim of domestic abuse into a champion for children she would never meet. She turned her darkest experience into light for thousands of families facing their own darkness. What empire are you going to build from the ashes of your struggles? What healing are you going to create from your pain? What courage are you going to find when the world tells you to stay silent and stay small? If this story inspired you, I need you to do 3 things right now. First, like this video to help it reach others who need to hear this message of hope and transformation. Your like helps the algorithm share stories of resilience with people who are looking for proof that change is possible. Second, subscribe and hit that notification bell because we share stories like this every week. Stories of ordinary people who found extraordinary courage. Stories of individuals who refuse to accept injustice. Stories that prove no matter how dark your situation seems, there's always a path to the light if you're brave enough to look for it. Third, share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever found strength you didn't know you had? Have you ever discovered that the person trying to destroy you was actually preparing you for something greater? Your story could be the encouragement someone else needs to take their first step toward freedom. Remember, the most powerful love story you'll ever have is the one you write for yourself. The most important empire you'll ever build is the one constructed from your own healing. The most meaningful victory you'll ever achieve is the one that creates space for others to win as well. Amara's story started with a woman trapped in a golden cage, convinced that she was powerless against forces beyond her control. It ended with that same woman standing in front of Congress, her quiet voice changing laws that will protect countless families for generations to come. Your story is still being written. The pen is in your hand. What are you going to write next? Until next time, keep believing in the phoenix within you. Keep choosing courage over comfort. Keep transforming your pain into purpose. And keep remembering that sometimes the person trying to destroy you is actually forging you into someone strong enough to save the world. The dawn is always possible for those brave enough to seek it.